Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining us for Point of View. Dr. Merrill Matthews is with me, resident scholar at Institute for Policy Innovation, frequent panelist, a guest host here on Point of View. And, buddy, thank you for being here. I really can't wait till the election's over.
I'm so ready for this to be over. But here's the bad news. As soon as this election's over, the 2020 presidential election starts.
Maybe we ought to enjoy what we've got.
I'm eager to see Michael Avenatti become the Democratic presidential nominee. I think that would be just really interesting.
That would be actually good, don't you think? I mean, do you think that anybody's crazy enough to allow him to have a chance?
I think Democrats are crazy enough to allow anything these days. So who knows?
Well, you know, that's true. Now, looking at this election, I was complaining along the way that, or not complaining, but just accusing Democrats of being so progressive and floating these far left candidates like Ocasio-Cortez in New York, for instance. But really, as I look at it now, really she's an outlier. She got the nomination. She will win in that part of New York. Perhaps this Gillum candidate in Florida who may win the governorship there. He's very far to the left. But for the most part, the Democrats actually ran moderates, didn't they?
They certainly did in the House. But what's driving the Democratic Party is the far left. So even if you're a Joe Manchin in West Virginia, you're the outlier there in the Democratic Party. It is hard to be a moderate in the Democratic Party these days, and I think we will see the far left agenda becoming part of the Democratic platform as we move to 2020, aided and abetted by the media. Which, if a Democrat comes up and says, the tax cuts they passed in December 2017, that wasn't bad legislation. It actually helped. You get no media attention. If you step up and say, as a Democrat, I'm a little concerned about the people who are coming up from Guatemala, Honduras, Mexico, and so forth. We need to make sure we're doing this. You get no attention. If you come up and say outlandish things like, we need to abolish the ICE right now, we need to let these people in, and so forth, you get all kinds of attention. So I think the media is going to actually aid and abet the far left progressives, and the Bernie Sanders wing of the party will become the voice of it.
Well, we have our work cut out for us as alternative media, in a sense, because we must educate the American people, especially, I think, a younger generation that doesn't understand what socialism is, what it's like when the left gets in control or threatens to. And I think we have, we're spoiled, and we'll talk about the economic news in a minute. We're spoiled with a very good economy right now. We're spoiled with, just kind of a good situation for most Americans, although, they're suffering in pockets. But people have the luxury of saying, oh, I just don't like capitalism. And especially when you're on a university campus and your professors are telling you all the evils of our country and the white man, et cetera. So you have this, I don't know, there's some sort of an attraction right now for socialism, especially among millennials. And we've got to do this is serious business. We've got to do some education on this.
Right. And it has moved past basic discussions of facts and issues and implications of policies and so forth two sort of feel-good things of let's have what they call Medicare for all. That's a single-payer, government-run healthcare system. Let's have that, and we'll be able to take care of everybody, and we'll be able to do it for a lot less money than we're doing right now. Or let's have universal basic income. Let's make sure everybody in the country gets at least $800 a month, $1,000 a month, and so they will have at least some income, and that would just be great for the country. With virtually no analysis of can we afford this? Is it good to give Bill Gates $1,000 a month? Because if you're talking universal basic income, if everybody gets it, then that includes Bill Gates. If you don't want to make it universal, then you're just talking about a means-tested program. That's a welfare program, and the only question is where you draw the line as to who gets it and who doesn't.
Yeah, and do you require some sort of work among the able-bodied? And, like there's other ideas out there that are so far to the left that it's absurd. Things like, they're not necessarily monetary, but abolishing ICE, for instance. Or, well, this is a monetary one, free college education for everybody.
Right.
You've got that being floated.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, these are things that all sound good. They sound utopian in a sense, and they are utopian. And, for universal basic income, I did a commentary on it this week. If people want to listen during the 45-minute break, they can hear it. But in Finland, they tried this, and they did it for a short time. They pulled the plug on it, and they looked at it. If it was going to go nationwide, it was going to be a 30% tax increase.
Right.
And the people didn't like that too well.
Yeah, the Finland, if I remember right, started out with the idea of let's do it universal, but if that doesn't work, it would cost more than we actually take in taxes. So let's do a pilot project. And it's not worked well, and they've scaled that back. They've pulled it back, I believe.
Yeah, I think they totally pulled the plug.
Yeah.
People didn't like, okay, they're not going to work. I am working, and we're going to give them money for not working. I mean, it's one thing to have a welfare system for basic targeted groups.
Right.
Maybe moms with kids or whatever. But this is becoming a little bit ridiculous. And you also end up with a lot of government control when you have something like that. If the government's paying paying the piper for you, you pretty much have to do what the government tells you.
That's absolutely right. So but what's happening here is you've got several major Democrats that have come out in support of it, including past Democrats. Barack Obama's talking about the benefits of it. Several potential Democratic contenders are talking about universal basic income. Universal basic income has become a plank in the platform of the California Democratic Party, along with single-payer health care. So I think that's going to drive the system, because you don't get media attention if you talk about moderate things and how you sort of balance spending with taxes and things of that nature.
Okay, well, let's talk about something real, concrete, being reported. Actually, even the Washington Post can't ignore these stories. That there was a jobs number today, but wages in the third quarter surged up 3.1%, the biggest increase in 10 years. And median household income has hit a record high, and the unemployment rate, as we've talked about here before, hit a 50-year low. So you can't argue with those. No,
those are good numbers, and they added 250,000 jobs in the last month, and that's considered very good.
And that beat the even projections.
That's right. Yeah, it was a lot higher than the projections, but it did beat it. But however, there was concerns that with the hurricane coming in, that would have sort of skewed the numbers. But it turned out looking good, and they are drawing people. We look at the unemployment rate, that is 3.7% right now, I believe it is. But the other number, the more important number, is the labor participation rate, and that's the number of people who are actually working in the looking for a job and are willing to work, and that number is increasing as more people are going back to work, which is exactly what you need in a thriving economy.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, and this is, of course, news that's coming out, and we need to be talking about, as there is an election on Tuesday. A lot of people are voting early right now. Those are the things that really should matter to the voter. Next up, we are going to talk about the economy, also the election, and the caravan. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Most people would expect liberals to be open-minded, and yet they find that they are often the most intolerant. Kim Holmes explores the reason for this transformation in his new book, The Closing of the Liberal Mind. He was on my radio program to talk about the history of the radical change in mindset and attitude. Now, classical American liberalism in this country was based on a belief in liberty. Citizens were to be free from government coercion and thus free to believe something different from the orthodoxy forced on it by the state. They were also free to discuss and debate, and most importantly was a belief in true tolerance, which accepted the right and freedom of others to believe differently from you. It was a live and let live philosophy. I may disagree with your views, but I would defend your right to believe them. That is not the view of the postmodern left today. They practice the politics of intolerance. They may think that they are tolerant, but really live in a world where bigotry and discrimination are allowed against any view that is not politically correct. They are willing to stifle free thought, censor free speech, and use public shaming in order to suppress any idea they do not like. Now, in his book, he talks about the campus bullies, but we also discussed how this has moved into even the business world. Now we have corporate bullies willing to use economic power to stifle and suppress legislation they abhor. He says we have a new ruling class that is wealthy, smart, well-connected, and formidable. Although their numbers are small, actually in the thousands, their influence in the media, in the academy, and in government is significant. They also believe that they have a higher truth which is superior to the common wisdom of the day. You know, we're in a battle with a new kind of liberal mind, and that is why we need to read about the closing of the liberal mind. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Graceworks Pictures, Indivisible, based on the true story of Army Chaplain Darren Turner and his wife Heather. Rated PG-13. Now playing. IndivisibleMovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
A little bit later in the program, we will also be joined by Jeremy Dyes from First Liberty Institute, and I want to ask him, Dr. Matthews, and I know that you're going to weigh in on this too, but Trump has floated this whole idea of abolishing birthright citizenship. Mm-hmm. And we won't go into it right now, but we need to have a discussion about that and bring callers in too and get people's thoughts on that. I actually posted 2 articles. One is by George Conway, the husband of Kellyanne Conway, mm-hmm. And he speaks about preserving that. He says it's unconstitutional to abolish it. And he's got another co-author. I forget the name right now. And then there's one from the Heritage Foundation, Hans Van Spakovsky. Yeah. That it's fine that mm-hmm. we could abolish that and remain constitutional. As a matter of fact, it would be wise. So we'll talk. That will be a hot button a little bit later in the program.
It will be a very hot button, I suspect.
I think so. But I want to get back to the economy because you work for the Institute for Policy Innovation. Mm-hmm. And you've put together a report about the Trump economy that right. people can get. I didn't know this earlier. I would have posted it at pointofview.net, but we can click through, can't we?
Yes, you can. You can go to IPI.org. It'll be there. If it's not on the homepage, it'll probably be on the second page if you just look at the publications there, because it came out 2 or 3 weeks ago. But essentially what I did was to say, here is the... It starts out by talking about how we know a picture was worth 1,000 words. A picture can tell you all kinds of things that you don't want to necessarily hear in words. You can just see it. So this has 10 different graphs in there, charts and graphs about what's happening in the economy, unemployment rate. And you know what's interesting about this? We'll take the unemployment rate. let's go. I have the graph in there for Hispanic unemployment rate. This is from the Federal Reserve Bank. And you see the unemployment rate when Barack Obama comes up and says, I was the one who got the economy going. I'm responsible for all this. Yeah. It turns out that you can see the unemployment rate declining. It's a fairly steady decline since the recession. But come around 2015, it starts leveling off. And all through 2016, the unemployment rate among Hispanics and blacks and Americans in general levels off for about a year. It's not going any lower. In other words, it has peaked on the low side, and you're not going to get much better from that. Come around 2016, into 2016, beginning of 2017, you see a dramatic decrease there. So once Trump gets in and the employers are beginning to say, we're going to start hiring again, you see that shift in that going down. And you see that in several places. You see it in the stock market. Stock market starts just kind of leveling off, going up a little bit, but by the time you hit November 2016, right after the election, stock market starts going up. Business confidence. December of 2016, business confidence just explodes.
Yes, I remember that.
And you can see it in the graph. The two other times that you see that happening in the past 30, 35, 40 years was right after the Ronald Reagan election and right after Reagan's first tax cut. You see that business confidence shoot up. Consumer confidence at some of the highest levels it has ever been. So when you just look at the graphs there, the graphs will tell you the story of what's happening in the economy, and you see these sort of peaks and valleys. But once you get to around December of 2016, January 2017, you see a noticeable difference.
So that was the beginning, even before President Trump took office. Mm-hmm. All the talk of deregulating and what was going to be happening brought about confidence, and people began changing their behavior. And I do think that, with President Trump, if you look at a lot of things like this that have been done, that have happened, real accomplishments, then you overlook, if you didn't like how he tweeted or whatever, you overlook that because most voters, at least I think the wise voter is smart enough to just look at the country and look beyond their taste. Mm-hmm. I was reading today one columnist in the Washington Post, mm-hmm. Michael Gerson. Mm-hmm. He was a Bush speechwriter. Right. He's fairly conservative, moderate conservative, but he hates Trump so much and everything that Trump does. I look at it and I'm like, don't you care about the country? Why are you being so picky about this, personality issues? And it drives me nuts. I mean, I know you don't expect the left to support the White House or this presidency, but when you have people who are Republicans, center-right people, I mean, it just seems crazy to go against the best interests of the country, which are becoming more and more apparent that this White House is serving those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what you see is this president is, I think, in many ways, the most on the one hand, on the other hand, president. So you have mm-hmm. one group of people who say, on the one hand, I don't really like him personally. I don't like his tweets. I don't like his mannerisms and things of that nature. On the other hand, the economy is doing pretty darn well, and we should sort of stick behind him with that. The flip side is the economy is doing pretty well. On the other hand, I really dislike him.
Which comes first?
And it's which comes first. And to your point, you've got a lot of people out there who think the economy comes first, and they're willing to sort of accept Trump's mannerisms and other things because of both the economy and the judicial appointment.
The judicial and really I think our stance on the international front. Some people don't agree with his tariff policy, mm-hmm. but we're starting to see some changes in behavior, for instance, from other countries that may be as a result of us standing tough on trade.
That's exactly right. For instance, with NATO. President Trump went to the NATO meeting here a few months ago, gave Germany a pretty hard time for mm-hmm. For going into a deal with Russia to get their natural gas. And he wanted the group to pay more for their own self-defense, for their own defense. I heard Ari Fleischer, who used to be George Bush's press secretary, say afterwards, he said, George Bush would go over there and he would always say, "We need you chipping in more for this," and they would all say, "Yes, we'll do that," and they'd never do anything. Trump's apparently going to get them to do something, and Germany has decided to scale back that project that they have with Russia and to begin to buy more U.S. natural gas. If you're funding Russia, you're funding mischief. If you're funding the U.S. or helping our economy, you're actually helping us be able to support you militarily. So I think it was the right thing to do. He got a lot of negative criticism for that, but he may be getting some action from it.
Very interesting. And I think sometimes you have to just wait out those things. When you hear a radical statement coming out of this White House, and, probably.
And you hear a number of them.
You hear a lot, and probably a lot of his staff and the cabinet and others, they squirm a little bit. But they're learning, and I think we're all learning to hold our fire and wait
Except
to see what happens.
The mainstream media are not learning to hold their fire at all. I've never seen anything like this. They'll take anything and run with it and make it the worst possible thing they could possibly make it.
Yeah. So, are they crying wolf? Is that going to, be effective throughout the next 2 years until the next election? I don't know.
It may some, but I completely ignore them anymore. I mean, it's hard to pay much attention to what they say because they are so often in areas I know things about, or they're so often wrong. In other areas, you sort of wait a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and you find out they were just completely wrong about that.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking elections today, in addition to all the other issues on the table. And we know, and we've talked about this, since 1950, a sitting president's party has lost an average of 24 House seats. In the midterm election. If that happens, the House is going to move from Republican to Democrat hands and control. And the Democrats do face a difficult task to take the Senate. We're looking at a lot of individual races and seeing that they're shaking down on one side or the other. But the Democrats may even lose seats in the Senate. It's possible, maybe one or two. There are going to be many tight races out there. So it's very interesting right now. But we don't have much better of an idea of what is going to be the outcome, do we? And we did like last week.
We absolutely do not. And then the other thing to complicate that is the pollsters and others have been so wrong in years past that if they're saying one thing, is that really necessarily going to be the case? And I will just say this, and I said it several times, I have no idea how this is going to come out. But Trump has tended to outperform expectations time and again. Don't know that that'll happen this time, but you want to be very careful about writing him off because he just tends to outperform expectations.
And that may translate down to his party these days. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to, if anyone wants to kind of chime in on this election, one of the issues we want to talk about a little bit later is voter fraud, voter ID, and also just some of the shenanigans that are taking place with regard to campaign materials. If you've got any stories about that you'd like to report to us, I'll open the phones 800-351-1212. Especially in Texas, we would love to hear, actually not love, but we need to hear of these stories. So give us a call and we'll be right back.
A 2013 survey asked people around the world whether sex without marriage is morally wrong. Every country where more than 90% said, yes, it's morally wrong, Islamic. The worst two, tied at 6% saying it's wrong, France and Germany, the nations of Calvin and Luther. Catholic Italy, 11%. Simply sad. The United States, 31%. Not even 1 in 3 thinks extramarital sex is morally wrong. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Penna Dexter.
And Dr. Merrill Matthews is also with me in studio. He is with the Institute for Policy Innovation. We're talking elections. Yesterday in his Wall Street Journal column, Karl Rove said that initial reports are that GOP-affiliated voters have surpassed Democrat-affiliated voters in early voting in some of these key states where there's key Senate races and governor races, like Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Indiana, Montana, Tennessee, and Texas. All key Senate and or governor races in those states. Really, what about just overall? How is the early voting going?
Well, we know NBC released a poll, I believe it was yesterday, where they've been tracking early voting turnout. So for 2014, 40% of the of the early voter turnout was Democratic, 44% was Republican. So Republicans led then, 16% was what they classed as others. In the 2016 race, so that's the presidential race, Democrats actually were ahead of Republicans. 43% of early voters were Democrat, 40% Republican, 17% on others. So about the same thing on the other. So far this year, with I believe they're saying 6 days left to the vote, an early turnout, 41% of Democrats, 43% Republicans, which goes along to what Karl Rove was saying. And he had to submit that column a day or two before this, so he didn't have this information. 16% others. So interestingly, the Republicans in the NBC poll were the Republican early turnout was leading Democratic by 2 percentage points, which is close to where it was 2014. It's a different kind of race then, but close to where it was in 2014. So what I find interesting about this is all the media stories I hear is all these people turning out for early voting must be Democrats because they're the ones that are really energized. And apparently, at least from the early totals, there are larger numbers turning out for early voting. So
of Republicans.
Of everybody. So you've got in 2018 right now, you've got 24 million early votes, okay, so far. For 2016, which was a presidential election, you had 29 million early votes at that point. And then in 2014, you only had 12 million. So we've got twice as many early voting this time as we did in 2014. So you've got a lot more people turning out, but the percentages-wise are just about the same.
Are they stealing from Election Day, or we just have more people voting? That's the big question.
And that's the big question. It would not surprise me at all if you have a larger number of turnouts for this election than you did for 2014. But 2014, they're trying to compare that as a midterm election, and it was, but that was Barack Obama's second midterm. It's usually the midterm after a new president comes in that you really have the pushback, and we saw that in 2010 after Barack Obama won in 2008 and took over in 2009. So we're not sure what this means. I suspect you have more people voting early than you had in the past because it just makes it easier to do that, and there's more opportunities to do it. But I also suspect we're going to have a higher turnout than we typically do for midterm elections.
Well, you had the anti-Trump enthusiasm. Then you had the Republicans kind of catch up with that because of, number one, Labor Day. Just after Labor Day, people pay more attention. And number two, the Kavanaugh hearings energized the Republican base.
And I think from the Democratic side, they've done a good job of trying to energize millennials, college students. Here in Texas, Beto O'Rourke has been speaking on college campuses, trying to get them to go to the polls because our college students, bless their hearts, most of them are not paying taxes yet, don't have families yet, haven't been hit.
They love some of his lofty ideas.
Haven't been hit in the face with life and the challenges of, and so they tend to like the lofty ideals and tend to lean Democratic. So if they're going to the polls in larger number, that certainly may help Democrats. But at least so far, from what we're telling from the early voting, Republicans are leading. Now, that doesn't. These are people who tend to vote Republican, so we don't know how they voted. Some of those Republicans may have come in and voted Democrat. Some of the Democratic may have come in and voted Republican in some cases. So we don't. We just know sort of what the affiliation is, not how they're actually voting.
And so we really don't know, and no one should take anything for granted at this point, even just a few days out from Election Day.
Exactly right, which is why, to some extent, Republicans are trying to tap this down because they don't want potential Republican voters to say, oh, well, Republicans are turning out in larger numbers. Why go to the polls then? I'm probably not going to make much difference. They want them going to the polls to vote because it's probably going to be close in a lot of elections, and we just don't know.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to vote today. I was very busy this week, but I don't like to count on not being busy on election day. I want to get my vote done. So after point of view, I'm going to the polls. I hope it's not too crowded.
I went last week, but I waited for the first 2 or 3 days after the mad rush at first when there were some lines. And when I went in, it was just walk right in. And
it was.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's good. Well, speaking of not being able to take things for granted, sometimes a candidate will think, okay, this is a very good opportunity for me to run for this office. And then something comes up that derails them. And we were talking during the break about the state of Minnesota and one person who's actually, he rose very high in the Democrat Party, Keith Ellison.
Right.
Wasn't he chairman of the Democrat committee?
Vice chairman of the party, and he was wanting to be president, but Tom Perez won that instead, so they made him vice chairman. So he was a member of Congress. He's now running for Attorney General in Minnesota. Interestingly, in the Me Too era, he's had a former girlfriend come up and accuse him of sexual assault and other things, abuse. The Democrats.
I don't think it's that former, though. It's not that long ago.
No, it was not.
Some others we've seen.
It was not that long ago. Democrats tried to ignore this to some extent, but apparently voters in Minnesota have picked up on it. And even though you would expect him to normally go through with in a breeze, he is actually, at least as of a week ago, he was trailing his Republican opponent for the Attorney General slot in Minnesota. And Attorney General slot in Minnesota hasn't won that slot in, I think, 30 years or so.
A GOP candidate hasn't?
A GOP candidate hasn't won it in decades, but one might this time.
Looking at states like Minnesota where they're very liberal, super liberal. It's sometimes amazing that once in a while you can actually get a really strong Republican like Michelle Bachmann,
right,
running in those states.
And remember, Tim Pawlenty was governor. He was a Republican for, I think he did 2 terms there. He was considered a moderate Republican with a sort of an affinity for environmental issues, which sort of doesn't go well with the Republican Party these days. But he was a Republican governor and was widely appreciated at the time. I think he was floating the idea that he might come back and got kind of a cold shoulder for that. But
got kind of a cold shoulder. He wasn't exactly the most exciting candidate.
He was not.
What about, speaking of excitement, a lot of people, I think the media would like to tell you, this election is about Donald Trump. And really
And Donald Trump's telling you about that.
And he's telling us that too. Basically, what do you think? Do you think that, is Trump on the ballot?
I just don't have a good sense. I think there is a sense in which it is. I think a lot of protest votes out there are, we so dislike Donald Trump, we're going to vote for the other person. So I certainly think that's an element out there. He does seem to have alienated some voters, but he's attracted others. And so the parties are reforming right now as Republicans are beginning to draw in more of the blue-collar worker, which they had under Ronald Reagan. Those are the Reagan Democrats. He may be getting more of those now. But on the other hand, African Americans. It is you can tell how concerned Democrats are about the African American vote shifting over to Donald Trump and people who are aligning with him, because they're essentially attacking African Americans so much for considering that. Kanye West and some of the others. Donald Trump had a huge group of young African Americans in the White House here just earlier this week, I think it was, and they were just completely dismissed or degraded by some of the media out there, because they just felt like these are people who they're not holding the black line like they should in opposing Donald Trump.
Well, I think people could go back. You mentioned a chart that you created in a whole report, and the chart about unemployment figures for different communities, including African American. The results are out there, and I mean, they can't argue with that. The media can. I guess they can ignore the truth if they want to.
The African American worker always has a much higher percentage unemployment rate than the white worker, but those have come down significantly into the areas of what economists call full employment. It's not down to 3.7%, but I think it's in the low fives, high fours, something like that. So they've done well in this economy, and there are jobs and help wanted signs all over the place out there. And if you go back to the notion of it's the economy stupid, I think you'll find some people willing to do that.
Especially if your life is better.
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've got more after this. Stay with us. If you are listening online, go listen to my commentary on universal basic income, and we'll talk about it a little bit more after this.
A really bad idea is bubbling up from the left. It stems partly from the idea that artificial intelligence and the resulting automation of jobs from driving to technology will displace so many workers we've just got to do something. The universal basic income has been floated by Barack Obama and certain Silicon Valley titans, among them Bill Gates, Richard Branson, and Mark Zuckerberg. They see UBI as an efficient way to prevent poverty in our hyper-automated and globalized future. Facebook co-founder Chris Hughes is helping fund a pilot UBI project in Stockton, California that launches next month. Chicago Alderman Amaya Pavar asks, if jobs simply go away, what are we going to do with the workforce? He's introduced legislation that would establish a pilot program that would give $500 per month to 1,000 families. Most basic income proposals are local, but there's talk of taking this national. Investment management firm Bridgewater Associates estimates the cost at $3.8 trillion per year to give people a basic income of $12,000. The entire federal budget is just over $4 trillion. Finland launched a basic income program in 2017. 2,000 unemployed people received a monthly stipend, no strings attached. The government pulled the plug. According to the Daily Signal's Jarrett Stepman, taxpayers simply became fed up with paying people not to work. To implement the program nationally would have necessitated a 30% tax increase. Jarrett Stepman writes that with UBI, we'd risk creating a kind of warehouse society, whereby one class of people works while the other skates by mostly on public money, seeing no incentive to work or better their condition and status. UBI is the left's dream. The Wall Street Journal's Andy Kessler calls it a gateway drug to collectivism. JFK worried about machines stealing jobs in the 60s, telling reporters automation, of course, is replacing men. That fear ignores the genius of our capitalist system.
For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Thank you very much for joining us today. We're glad you're with us. And during the break, if folks are listening online, they heard my commentary on universal basic income. And it's one that really gets to me in a sense, because we've got now a lot of research going on into artificial intelligence. Mm-hmm. And, you know, there are going to be self-driving cars. There are going to be so many different jobs automated because of AI. And so a lot of the top tech type people like Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg or Richard Branson, people like that, are saying, well, we're going to displace so many workers that we're going to need to help these people. And their idea is a universal basic income. Mm-hmm. And, you know, but there's another side of that coin, isn't there?
There is. Technology does take away jobs, but it also creates jobs. And the historical pattern is that it creates more jobs than it actually takes away. So what I did here, probably 3 or 4 months ago, because I'd heard these arguments, I went and looked at the top 10 countries that adopt technology. So United States is one, Israel's one, South Korea's in there. Is several of the countries that are the leading countries in adopting new technology, and just looked at that to compare their unemployment rate. And lo and behold, I think 7 or 8 out of the 10 had some of the lowest unemployment rates they have ever had, and much lower than the world in general. So at least from that, things can change. 20 years, it can be from now, it could be different. But at least right now, those countries that are adopting the fastest adopters of new technology actually have the lowest unemployment rates on average.
So the type of job that you have sometimes changes, and I've noticed even President Trump and the Trump administration talking about this, doing more training because we are going to have different skills needed. Of course, we're saying we don't want to allow people to come into the country illegally, and yet we need workers. So all of this is in flux, in a sense, and changing. But the answer is not a universal basic income for
That's
all
right.
Americans.
That is not the answer. You do want a safety net to capture those people who, for some reason, have been downsized, booted out, a recession has come and you've lost. So you want to have a safety net, but you want a safety net which encourages people, which only meets needs, does not encourage people to have more babies or something of that nature, take advantage of it, encourages them to get back into the workforce as quickly as possible. And when you do that, you actually spur the economy rather than increase the economy. We need more workers right now. I mean, economists will tell you we're in a situation where we need more workers. So the fact that that more people who have been out of the workforce are moving back in the workforce, that's good news. Some of that's got to be supplied by immigrants as well. So we want immigrants here who can work, but you want them here legally, going through the process, because we have a lot of jobs right now that need to be filled.
Yeah. So, I mean, is that an argument? Because we're going to talk a little bit later about babies, birthright babies, the word that's been thrown around all week. So with that, if you get rid of that, I mean, that's a lot of babies right now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It is. We've got to. It is a lot of babies that are here. Because they are here legally, they have to go through the process. Their parents are often here illegally. It is a problem. It's a huge problem. And then there is this birth tourism that are going. I wrote on this probably 8 or 9 years ago. It was a story out of the newspaper, I think, in Arizona, where wealthy Mexican women were flying in private jets to a spa in Arizona. They were pregnant. They were coming there to the spa. They would stay there 2 or 3 months, have their baby, and then they would return back. So the baby is an American citizen, but it wasn't coming here for jobs or anything else. It was wealthy people wealthy Mexicans flying their private jets, who wanted to come in and have their children have U.S. citizenship. So at some point, maybe they want to stay in Mexico, but at least it creates a process for them to be able to say, my child's a U.S. citizen. We all want to come here if Mexico has a major problem.
It sounds weird, but I don't think that's really the problem that we have, because we're not going to end up supporting those people through our benefits programs.
Oh, we actually do support them through our benefits.
The tourist births?
That's right. If they're going back, they're likely not to stay here unless they want to shift here permanently. So with the birthright citizenship, we support a lot of people with public benefits, because if you're born here, or even if you come across the border with a child, you have a right to an education here. So you're going to support them with education. You have a right to, if you're medically, if you have a medical condition, you don't have insurance, and you show up at the emergency room, they will treat you. That's under federal law. They have to treat you. And then if the child is a citizen because they were born here, the child may be able to get benefits through welfare and other things, and the parents are the ones who control that, even if they're not here legally.
Wow. Well, okay, that's going to be a topic for the next hour because there's also a lot of controversy this week. People have been talking about some of these arguments, constitutional arguments about birthright citizenship. So we'll take that up in the next hour. Jeremy Dyes will also be joining us, and we'll get his opinion since he's actually a lawyer and a constitutional attorney. And we'll talk about some of the cases. And boy, I have some questions to ask because we've been hearing that a couple of First Liberties cases are actually on the door of the Supreme Court and may be accepted or rejected. So that should be fun. Also, we're going to be joined by John Graves a little bit later from Vision America because he's been made aware that the voter guides that Vision America puts out puts in churches, help people vote, help them know how to
Voter
vote,
guides
are being altered.
Yes.
So we'll get that story from him.
And you look at what they are putting out there instead. I'm just amazed at this. The chutzpah of some people who will go in and take out what Vision America put in there and put in something that looks. I mean, this is it's trademark theft. They're making it Vision America. It's copyright theft. It's theft in taking the things. I'm amazed at this.
When you look at any kind of defrauding of your vote, or misleading, but also just voter fraud. I mean, you look at that and you realize that for every vote where someone votes illegally, where they shouldn't be voting, or they're voting twice or whatever, that actually negates someone's vote. It negates my vote or your vote. So, it's really a valuable right that we have, the right to vote, and it's important for us right now to preserve it. And, we're looking around the country and seeing different types of voter fraud taking place. We're seeing, for instance, in the state of Texas, where we try to keep everything on the up and up, and we can't even have a voter ID law, a picture ID law here in Texas. It's been struck down by the courts. So, this is an ongoing battle, and I think it really heats up during election times. And so that's why we've asked people if they would like to call in, if they've got any reports of anything that's gone on in their polling places or anything they've seen with regard to this, that give us a call, 800-351-1212, and we'd love to talk about that. We're going to also bring up, of course, the caravan that's heading toward our borders. I guess more than one caravan now. Some of the caravans are getting a little bit smaller.
Caravans.
but there are a lot of people involved. Yes. President Trump is planning on how to deal with it when they get here. Some of his plans are controversial, to say the least, at least in the minds of a lot of other people. To a lot of us, they make actually common sense, something that should have been done for a long time. But this is another question that we'll ask our listeners, Buddy, and that is, how is that going to affect the election and people's votes? I mean, are people afraid of this quote-unquote invasion coming, or do they think it's really mean of us to try to stop these people from coming in? That's what the media would have you say. So we've got so much to talk about today that I think will be kind of hot buttons. They are hot buttons. That's why they're happening here right before the election. So stay with us, ladies and gentlemen. We've got a lot more here on Point of View. Listen to these messages, check out our website and our donate button, and we'll be right back.
Protect the health of the nation. Join the Point of View Truth Team. pointofview.net/team. pointofview.net/team. Or call 800-347-5151.
So there's this guy named Jordan. He's a healthy guy. He's a dad of 6, and he works as a guide in Alaska. And he goes to the doctor, true story, he goes to the doctor, and he's diagnosed with cancer, stage 4. And here's the thing. He had switched earlier from medical insurance to Medishare, where Christians share each other's medical bills. So the question for Jordan and his wife, Jenny, was, is this actually going to work?
Our medical bills exceeded $160,000. Medishare members shared all our bills.
And it was about more than just the money, too. This is a real community.
Medishare is a family, a group of people that stick with you through the hardest times of your life. I just don't know how I could have done it without Medishare.
It's so worth looking into. There's a reason this is growing so fast. So if you want to find out more, here is a number for you. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining me, ladies and gentlemen, for our Friday weekend edition of Point of View. In studio with me, Dr. Merrill Matthews, resident scholar for Institute for Policy Innovation. Hi, buddy.
Hi.
And Jeremy Dyes, and he is senior counsel at First Liberty Institute. Jeremy,
thanks for having me.
We have a lot to talk about, not the least of which, of course, is birthright citizenship. It's been a hot button all week. But first, I want to talk about the elections, and we have a guest on the line with us. He is John Graves. He is president of Vision America. He's an attorney and a pastor, and he really believes in mobilizing people of faith to vote. In that vein, this Vision America has produced voter guides, put them in churches, and some very interesting misbehavior has happened with regard to those voter guides this week. John, thank you for joining me. What's happened?
Thanks for having me. What happened is we make these available to Christians, believers all over the country, but also churches. They're church approved, and a lot of churches will take them, print them, and pass them out. And we got a call when early voting started that somebody had taken our voter guide, scanned it in, left our logo, left the candidates. We do 14 Senate races that are within single digits this election cycle. And this was in Texas. There were several different cities, and they basically changed all the question to make it look, for example, like Ted Cruz was not pro-life by reversing the questions and leaving the voter guide. But what was worse is they literally brought the stacks into several different locations and commingled them on the tables at the exit doors where Christians were leaving after the church service to take them out. So a lot of people took them. We're trying to identify who it is. It is a crime under the election code, fraud, copyright. There's all kinds of problems, but we're not quite sure who did this and whether or not it's somebody tied or connected to the Beto campaign. So that's what we're working on right now.
So it's showing Beto pro-life, Ted Cruz pro-abortion?
Correct. Yeah, they stated the question that since he voted or approved Obamacare, that would be making him pro-life, and Ted Cruz opposed to pro-life, because if you don't have access to health care, you're not pro-life, was kind of the implication.
John, can you tell us how many churches do you think this happened to? So, number one, they didn't just take the old ones and put the new ones down. They mixed them in, it sounds like.
That's right.
So
yeah, that's right.
It would make it a little harder to identify, because if you just saw some of the standard ones up on top of a list or something, you might not think about it. So do you have an idea how many churches that might have affected?
We don't know yet. Last election cycle, we were in front of 5,000 pastors and did 5 million of these voter guides. So we're in 14 states with these. We know of at least 3 different cities, and we're having different people call us and contact us. A lot of people take them and don't understand what's happened. I mean, what happened here was a husband and wife went out different doors. She went to get the kids. He went to get the car. They got out to the car, and they each had different voter guides, and they came back inside, alerted the pastor, he called us, and then we found out some of the locations where this happened.
So 3 cities, but that could be several churches within the 3 cities?
Yeah, it could be in several states.
So do you want to tell us what churches?
No, I really don't. I really don't want to get into that. The churches,
it's not their
I'm
fault,
more,
probably.
Yeah, I know, but I don't want to create a chilling effect, and these churches don't want to get into a big, nasty national George Soros lawsuit. So I'm trying to identify who it is and how many people it is and where all it's happened. My passion is that what the enemy meant for deception and evil and harm could turn into good, and more people. And so we're sending people just to our website, visionamerica.org. If they have Facebook, they can do /vote, and it'll basically take them in, and wherever they are in those 14 states, they just click on there and they get a voter guide, give it to their pastor, give it to their friends.
So did you send a note to the various pastors or to the various churches that have the guides to say, this is happening,
Absolutely.
you need to go check and see? Because I would think that would be one way to find out pretty quickly.
Absolutely, yeah. That's why it could be a limited area. It could only be in Texas. That's all we know about so far. We've got over 1 million paper voter guides going across Florida right now for the governor and Senate race there, but we also do them electronically. So the challenge for me is the first call I got was a church that was handing them out. I didn't even know they were handing them out. So we don't only give it to churches that coordinate with us. We basically say, here it is. If you want it, it's free. Take it and print it. And
It's
pass
good
it
to
as many as
find
you
out
want.
there in places you didn't even expect.
Oh, it's wonderful. Yeah, it's wonderful. It's happening all over the country. So that's the part that, I'd rather it just get out there.
And the same voter guide is available for every state. So Texas wouldn't be different than one, say, in Louisiana.
Well, they are different. Yeah.
Oh.
So in Texas, it would be the Senate race here, Cruz and Beto. In Florida, it'd be the governor race and the Senate.
I
race.
see. Okay.
Montana, it'd be the Senate race and the congressional race.
So there are some variations then.
Absolutely. Yeah. You just click, if you go to visionamerica.org, you click on the voter guide, you click your state, and then that's the voter guide you get.
John, you're not the only group that produces voter guides. Have you received any word from any other groups that have had similar things happen?
We haven't. We haven't heard from this. We partner with a lot of different ministries that do this in different states and some nationally, and we haven't heard of that yet.
Is law enforcement involved in this yet? It seems like a pretty substantial issue a couple days before the primary or the midterm elections.
Yeah, we've reported it to some people, but part of the challenge is, until we have a clearly identifiable defendant, we can't really file a criminal complaint against blank, it's kind of, so that's where we're focused. We do have some surveillance pictures in a couple locations, and we're trying to identify who they are. They clearly came from outside the church, inside the church, and that's the part that makes me upset is you come inside the house of God to deceive the people of God. I mean, it's one thing to send mail pieces or run commercials that are deceptive, but it's a completely different thing to come inside churches and do this. And so I don't know a pastor worth his salt that wouldn't feel, like protecting his sheep, if you will, as a shepherd. And so, once we find that, it is a crime under the election code. And so we can file that. We just need a defendant. It's kind of like somebody stealing something. You don't know who stole it. You don't know who to charge.
Well, and at the same token, it can be detrimental to you as well. Not only is there wrong information getting out under your name, although it's kind of nice that they left your website on there so they could go double check these things if they had to. But,
exactly.
But the FEC, the IRS, these voter guides have to be produced in a very precise way to not run afoul of certain laws. So you could become hit on this as well.
Well, actually, because we stopped it and it's not our guide, it's a violation of copyright. We, under the IRS, we make ours, church approved. Here, you bring up a funny point I forgot to mention. It's ours is footnoted. So we don't impose or endorse a candidate. We just don't do that. We just give facts on life, marriage, religious liberty, prison reform, Israel, all the things that we believe, Christians and conservatives care about. Well, they deleted all the footnotes on the back. We have ours hyperlinked. Every one of ours is footnoted. Well, obviously, I don't have time to run through every one of the questions, but, the Obamacare being pro-life was one example. Well, there's no footnotes for it.
Okay. Well, John, thank you for the report. It's really disturbing, but it's good that we know about it. Thank you for telling us.
Yes. Yeah.
And thank you for all the work you're doing. It's an important last few days here. That's John Graves from Vision America. Ladies and gentlemen, we have so much more. We'll be back after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Most people would expect liberals to be open-minded, and yet they find that they are often the most intolerant. Kim Holmes explores the reason for this transformation in his new book, The Closing of the Liberal Mind. He was on my radio program to talk about the history of the radical change in mindset and attitude. Now, classical American liberalism in this country was based on a belief in liberty. Citizens were to be free from government coercion and thus free to believe something different from the orthodoxy forced on it by the state. They were also free to discuss and debate, and most importantly was a belief in true tolerance, which accepted the right and freedom of others to believe differently from you. It was a live and let live philosophy. I may disagree with your views, but I would defend your right to believe them. That is not the view of the postmodern left today. They practice the politics of intolerance. They may think that they are tolerant, but really live in a world where bigotry and discrimination are allowed against any view that is not politically correct. They are willing to stifle free thought, censor free speech, and use public shaming in order to suppress any idea they do not like. Now, in his book, he talks about the campus bullies, but we also discussed how this has moved into even the business world. Now we have corporate bullies willing to use economic power to stifle and suppress legislation they abhor. He says we have a new ruling class that is wealthy, smart, well-connected, and formidable. Although their numbers are small, actually in the thousands, their influence in the media, in the academy, and in government is significant. They also believe that they have a higher truth which is superior to the common wisdom of the day. You know, we're in a battle with a new kind of liberal mind, and that is why we need to read about the closing of the liberal mind. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Graceworks Pictures, Indivisible, based on the true story of Army Chaplain Darren Turner and his wife Heather. Rated PG-13. Now playing. IndivisibleMovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
I'm looking at First Liberty in Action, First Liberty Institute's newsletter. 3 reasons next week's vote makes First Liberty's work more urgent. And Jeremy Dyes is with me. And we've got several sort of cases that are very current in what's going on in those cases to talk about today. But also just overall, Jeremy, elections are important with regard to religious liberty, aren't they?
Very. I mean, there are laws that need to not only be instituted but enforced. And so how the president is viewed and how he's supported in those laws are very important. His agencies are the ones that are responsible for enforcing those laws that are currently on the books, and Congress provides a lot of oversight to those as well, whether that's in the matters of education or health or housing or even in the military. There are a lot of different congressional committees that have direct oversight of those matters, and if there are ongoing concerns about these matters, can call for legislative testimony and invite the heads of those agencies in to say, we passed these laws, why aren't you enforcing them in the way that they should be enforced? And they have to be called on the carpet, so to speak, to respond to those things. So that's just one level of it all. And then, of course, you have on the Senate side the important element of confirming nominees to the federal bench, where you're going to see a lot of these issues considered and weighed in. I was just in Richmond, Virginia yesterday, where our attorneys had an argument before the Fourth Circuit, and we had a new Trump appointee on that panel. That makes a pretty big difference when you go before these especially in the Fourth Circuit, where it's not exactly friendly territory anymore.
Jeremy, do religious liberty issues ever appear on a ballot in some form, either as a law or a resolution or something of that nature?
On occasion, I suppose so, but then you're going to look at, especially these midterms where you're dealing with so many local elections that are going on for the state houses. There are a number of state houses that still need to do some work on the religious liberty laws. A number of state RFRAs that have not been considered or passed. A lot of state lawmakers that have said one thing and then failed to deliver on providing things like RFRA. Some that have become very openly hostile to religious liberty that need to be removed from the state houses. And so that's where you find a lot of those. And then, of course, let's not forget way down on the ballot levels of things like education, school boards and local officers that can cause a lot of problems for students and local people who want to simply exercise their religion as well, especially at that school board level, where you have so many times you have school board officials that just simply fail to get it, or they've received really very bad advice from their city attorney or their school board attorney who took a class in religious liberty 30 years ago at the law school and doesn't think anything has changed since then, or can't even remember what he went through at that point. The point is that the school board officials need to have a good grounding on understanding what the law is and being willing to stand up for what the First Amendment protects.
Yeah, I think if they don't have a good grounding, often they are cowered in fear. They're intimidated from allowing people to have their constitutional rights. You know, speaking of religious liberty and people, just normal average citizens having their rights violated, this case that I'm looking at and that you guys have been working on this week, it's actually a matter. It's not really a court case. But Fellowship of Christian Athletes, which, I mean, who doesn't know about FCA? Such a wonderful organization and has been for decades. They seek to engage, equip, and empower coaches and athletes to unite, inspire, and change the world through their Christian faith. In Hardin County, Kentucky, though, Jeremy, they got some trouble. They got some opposition. Tell us about it.
Yeah, the school board there didn't allow them primarily to use the school facilities like every other secular club that is out there. So it's a fundamental rule in religious liberty, and especially this has been something very clear that the Department of Education, the U.S. Department of Education, has made clear since 2003. And frankly, it's a law that has been in place since 1984, if I recall correctly, the Equal Access Act. That it says this: look, if you are going to allow secular clubs to meet, you cannot disallow the use of facilities and resources of the school to religious clubs as well. And so I remember one case we had a couple years back where they had the chess club, they had the AV club, they had the Frisbee club, but they wouldn't allow a religious club to meet on campus. Same issue going on here in Hardin County, Kentucky, where they have a variety of different clubs, but they won't allow the Fellowship of Christian Athletes to be able to meet as a club as well. And that's just very open, very clear discrimination. But I think we're seeing some early reports from having sent our letter earlier this week that the school district is understanding that they may have made a mistake here and are working, I think, to begin to backpedal from that position. Smart idea. And to reinstitute this promise that the First Amendment has and the Equal Access Act has for students everywhere, that if you're going to open your facilities for secular clubs to meet, you have to also open them up for religious clubs to meet. You cannot discriminate based upon the religious beliefs or non-belief of those students.
You know, there's another piece from this week that I want to put direct people's attention to, and unfortunately we didn't get it to our website, but Lathan Watts, who comes in here on Fridays a lot and co-hosts our program and was in last week, wrote an article. It was published at Town Hall, and this is something, Jeremy, that has been a couple of matters that First Liberty has been dealing with that are, to me, they are beyond the pale because they take place at senior living facilities and they're so discriminatory toward people of faith there. And he's writing this piece at Town Hall, Senior Living in America, the Golden Years Without the Golden Rule. And, you know, when it's okay to talk about anything else in your meeting room at your senior facility, but you can't have a Bible study there, or you can't have Christian music there, as the case in one of them, it's somewhere where you need somebody to step in and help you when those kinds of things are taking place.
Absolutely. And it's very concerning to us to see the rise of these cases where in the situation, in at least one of these cases, Ken Hauge and his wife, which you can learn a lot more at firstliberty.org on all these cases. But Ken and his wife have he's a retired Lutheran minister, and there are a number of residents in this community that don't have a really easy way of getting out on Sundays or Wednesday nights for Bible studies. And so they've been looking for somebody to lead them through a Bible study. And here comes Ken. And he's very willing to do that, has done this his whole life. They tried to use the community room. They said, well, you can't call it a Bible study. You got to call it a book review. Well, that's just silly in many respects, but it's also illegal to tell them to do that. And then they changed the rules on them. And so they have to go and meet in private apartments. And eventually they are allowed to go back to the community room, but that then ends as well. They change the policies again. And when the policy changes, they say you cannot use the community room for anything that is religious. And so you can have a birthday party in there. You could have a wedding in there, I guess, so long as it's not a religious wedding. You could have a funeral in there, I suppose, but you can't have, a religious funeral in there. You can have all kinds of parties. I suppose you could have a St. Patrick's Day party if it's just a Patrick's Day party or something to that effect, So you can have all these things, but you can't do anything religious within these community rooms. Now, don't forget, this is where people live. They don't have big rooms in their houses anymore. They share small apartments. And so the community room is really an extension of their own home, and that's how the law views it. And so to prevent residents from being able to use an otherwise available room based upon religious reasons is rank religious discrimination. And in fact, it's kind of interesting that we pair these two cases together, the Hardin County, Kentucky one with the FCA being denied use of facilities, and now you've got senior citizens being denied use of their own facilities as well. They get you coming and going. I mean, it's both at the school age as well as in the elder years. Well, long story short, with Ken and Leave anyway, they try to meet in their apartments, and the same day they changed the policies on the community room use, they sent a letter to Ken and said, if you continue to have this Bible study in your apartment, you're going to be evicted from your home.
So this is even in the apartment itself.
In his own apartment. That's right. Or it was in one of the residents' apartments. Trying to squish in there because they can't be in the community room, and then that even becomes a problem. That's exactly right. And so if you can't practice your faith inside your own home, in which that apartment would be, where are you supposed to go for these things? Donna Dunbar is another case of ours, very similar situation, where she did have the community room that they were trying to use there. And in fact, they were told not to be able to use that for their Bible study. I was oddly enough there. I was there on St. Patrick's Day to look at this case, and they had all kinds of St. Patrick's Day decorations up. No irony whatsoever there, but that's what the case was. And they used to use the common area to be able to hold hymn sings together. And they actually had a sign when they were told not to use the community room anymore. A sign appeared on the piano of this area that said no, and the word was underlined, bold-faced, capital letters, no Christian music allowed on this piano. And so
there's a sign that says that.
There was. Somebody put it on there, and then it was removed, but the problem still remained. And so, look, this is frankly just a silly issue that should be resolved quickly. I'm a little. I'd like to see Dr. Carson, the head of the Housing and Urban Development Department, now take a little bit more affirmative action on these issues. We've seen other cases throughout the country where this has become a problem as well. The community use room problem. And so these need to be resolved. No one should be driven from their community or denied the use of their facilities for and certainly not being threatened with eviction for simply trying to exercise their faith.
To find out more about these cases and all of the cases that First Liberty Institute is dealing with, you can go to pointofview.net and click through to First Liberty, or you can just go to firstlibertyinstitute.org. After the break, I'm going to ask Jeremy about a couple of cases where First Liberty is trying to get the Supreme Court to take two very important cases that we love to talk about here at Point of View. We'll ask him about that after this.
From Graceworks Pictures comes Indivisible, based on the true story of Army Chaplain Darren Turner and his wife Heather.
It is with great honor that I have served my country, but I only stand before you today because Jesus is my rock, and because I have a family who loves and believes in me.
One marriage, one family, under God. Indivisible. Rated PG-13. May be inappropriate for children under 13. Now playing. More information is available at indivisiblemovie.com.
A major problem with socialism is that it allows people to benefit from the hard work of others. It permits the idle and indifferent to live off the efforts of their neighbors. For a society to prosper, everyone who is able has to contribute. And that's the only way Point of View Radio can bring you truth. We are profoundly thankful for you who have joined the Truth Team and make this program possible. If you're not on board, join today. Invest in our future together. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
We've got early voting going on in many states around the country, and an election on Tuesday. And certainly, Point of View listeners are encouraged to vote and bring everybody that you can. We posted a piece from the Washington Times today, an editorial. Democrats work to dilute the strength of legitimate ballots in so many ways. For instance, this one starts out, some things are simple and exact, like a chemical formula or the multiplication tables, equally simple by logic. Everyone who votes should be eligible to vote. and before receiving a ballot should be able to prove it. But in various states, it's harder to require proof of voting. There's also voter fraud that takes place across the country. And then we had John Graves on earlier talking about these efforts to go into churches and alter the voter guides. So there's a lot of that type of mischief taking place. If you've seen any of it, we'd love to hear from you. 800-351-1212. If you've got any reports from your polling places of sort of misbehavior or voter fraud going on. But we are talking about religious liberty here on Point of View. Jeremy Dyes from First Liberty Institute is with us. And Jeremy, there are a couple of cases we've been talking about that you have filed. You've asked the Supreme Court to take the cases, and we've been waiting to find out if they took the cases. What's happening?
Well, we're still waiting. Yeah, we have the Bladensburg World War I Veterans Memorial outside of Washington, D.C. that's been there since 1925, and we don't think it's going to go anywhere anytime soon, but the Humanist Association wants to tear that monument down, and frankly, it's up to the Supreme Court now whether or not it's going to stay there. The Fourth Circuit has ruled it unconstitutional, and so by logic, that would mean that the monument would have to be torn down or turned into some form of an obelisk. It's in the shape of a cross.
Like cut the arms off.
Cut the arms off. It's in the shape of a cross, like the crosses that were used to bury men over in World War I and overseas. And like so many of our, especially the European battlefield, American cemeteries there have those same monuments on them or the same gravestones on them over there. So we're waiting for the Supreme Court to decide whether they want to take the case or not. It's been rescheduled now 4 times. And so we will see Monday if they've decided they could be meeting this very minute, as a matter of fact, at the Supreme Court inside those chambers where Justice Kavanaugh would have to open the door if anybody knocked on it and make sure that everybody has food for the meeting. So that could be going on right now. So
that's what the most junior associate justice has to do?
That's right. That's their gentle hazing, that they require the most junior justice to open the doors when they're knocked on and to make sure that the meals are accounted for and the cafeteria is stocked and all that. So Justice Gorsuch had a very short tenure in that regard, but Justice Kavanaugh could have a much longer one in some respects. Justice Kagan, I think, has had the most lengthy one to date. So anyway, that's going on right now. And then at the same time, Coach Joe Kennedy's case is also up for consideration. They could be meeting right now about that as well. They're both scheduled for today at the conference, and we'll find out Monday from the Supreme Court in their orders that they released 9:30 Central or Eastern Time as to whether or not they've actually decided to hear either of these cases. They don't have to take either of the cases. They could choose not to.
And they don't have to decide this week.
They could push it back for as long as they want to push it back.
Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you have a question for Jeremy on these cases or any matter of religious liberty, give us a call, 800-351-1212. We welcome your conversation. Before we move on from the issue of religious liberty, Buddy, you had a couple more questions, I think.
Yes, I did. We were talking before the break about the Fellowship of Christian Athletes and the problem with them meeting in a public school, right? Mm-hmm. And then you've got the issue of a senior center, a retirement center. Does it make a difference if it's a public school but a private retirement center that doesn't accept government funds? Or maybe it does because some people in there may be on Medicaid and may be getting some kind of government funds, but is not considered a public institution.
Yeah, let me break them out so we don't conflate too much, because they are separate issues, although they sound very related. One, under the school scheme, of course, if it's a public school, the Equal Access Act applies. If a private school is keeping a club out, they can keep out whatever clubs they want. It's a private school, and they can do what they would like to do with that. And so the Department of Education, for instance, could not come in and cause any kind of problems for a Christian school, for instance, not allowing a Buddhist club or something like that to meet. They may wish to do so. They have the private right to make that decision. But that's separate. So the other issue you're asking about is, what about retirement communities, private or public? Does that make a difference? And the answer to that is actually no. Because these are fair housing laws that apply to every place in which someone would have some form of housing. There are certain requirements that size-wise, but most of these meet those very quickly and easily. And it doesn't depend upon whether you take funding or not. Mm-hmm. This is a fair housing matter. So you can't simply deny someone housing because they're religious or have a different color skin than you do or something like that. The law is such that's not permitted. In fact, on the Department of Justice's website, you got to kind of know where you're looking for it on here, but this very fact pattern, questioning whether or not the laws of fair housing are violated when this happens, is on the Department of Justice's website, saying that if you have a community room and you deny the room's use for religious purposes but allow it for everything else, you've engaged in fair housing discrimination and are subject to investigation and penalty by not only HUD, but also by the Department of Justice. So, it's pretty, this is as close as you can get to black letter law that you ought not to be doing that. And interestingly enough, when we filed the complaint with HUD, they at least in Donna's case, they sent out an investigator there. That investigator is not limited to the issue that has been complained about in its investigation. And so that government investigator, remember Ronald Reagan's line about worst words in the world, here, I'm from the government, I'm here to help, that investigator is not required to stick just to the questions about the community use policy. They can do a basement to attic search of the entire place and determine whether or not all the fair housing laws are being applied or not. Do you have the wheelchair ramps in the correct spots? There are certain regulations even as to, have you seen these when you're going from sidewalk to road and they'll have these little bumpy spots there? There are regulations about those little bumpy spots, and if you don't have those correct, you can be fined or have your license challenged. So it's very important for retirement communities to be up to spec on all these issues. You don't want someone coming in and finding a piece of paint that is chipped off incorrectly in the wrong spot, and you'll be subject to fines on all that. So that's a very interesting thing.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've got another sort of hot button that we haven't even brought up today, but it's sort of like the elephant in the living room in a sense, that because there's a caravan, actually more than one, that are heading toward the United States from the south, and they penetrated into Mexico, and this president is trying to be proactive to figure out what to do about it. And one thing he's talked about is bringing troops to the border, more troops to help the Border Patrol. He's talked about, because a lot of people are seeking asylum, putting tents at the border so people can stay there until they get their hearing. So these are nice tents that they could live in. He's talked also about curtailing birthright citizenship, which is something that's been happening for about 100 years in this country at least. And of course, there's all sorts of controversy and uproar about that. So that is all, kind of where we're sitting a couple of days before an election, 4 days actually before an election, 4 day of early voting in most places, and then Election Day on Tuesday. So it's really an interesting spot to be, isn't it, Dr. Matthews?
It is an interesting spot to be because it's taking off some of the other things. The good economy that's going on now, we're not talking as much about that. Justice Kavanaugh, we're not talking as much about that. So it has sort of changed the narrative of the things that have been going on, and it's not clear to me. It's clear that I think Donald Trump believes this helps Republicans because he is focusing on it so much at this particular point in time. I think it might, but it's just not clear to me whether it does or not. I mean, the caravan, the Democrats did not want to talk about the caravan because that looked like a mob moving here. And they didn't want to be on the side of sort of saying this is absolutely appropriate. They wanted to sort of just avoid that issue. But when you get to birthright citizenship, that creates a whole different discussion of things that I think most people don't really know much about. But generally, and I'd be curious, Jerry, I think generally it just doesn't quite seem right that a person can step across the border, deliver a baby, that baby is a step across the border illegally, deliver a baby, that baby is a citizen, and the mother may be able to stay here because the baby is now a citizen. Something just doesn't quite seem right about that.
Yeah, look, and I think we need to start with the reality that this was a comment that the president made standing outside of Marine One, about to get on the helicopter, said, I'm going to write an executive order, and the whole world went nuts, right?
It did.
Which I'm sure he expected.
I maybe so. I would assume so. But everything that he says seems. I mean, he could talk about the ingredients to chocolate cake, and people would lose their mind about it all.
Nuts.
So, anyway, the reality is there is no memo that we know of right now.
Yeah.
There exists no current memo.
Right.
So anything that is being said about any of this is pure and utter speculation.
Well, let's join the conversation because that's usually what happens. We get to talk a lot about it before we get a quote-unquote memo.
That's right. And maybe that was his goal, is to get everybody to kind of play their cards right now so that he can figure out, okay, what's the path through all this? And if that's the case, that's brilliant. But, we can come back later on and talk more about this. I didn't look at the time up there. But it's an interesting issue. Where do we stand on this? Is it constitutional or not?
If you want to weigh in on it, we'd love to hear from you. 800-351-1212. Stay with us for more of Point of View.
A really bad idea is bubbling up from the left. It stems partly from the idea that artificial intelligence and the resulting automation of jobs from driving to technology will displace so many workers we've just got to do something. The universal basic income has been floated by Barack Obama and certain Silicon Valley titans, among them Bill Gates, Richard Branson, and Mark Zuckerberg. They see UBI as an efficient way to prevent poverty in our hyper-automated and globalized future. Facebook co-founder Chris Hughes is helping fund a pilot UBI project in Stockton, California that launches next month. Chicago Alderman Amaya Pavar asks, if jobs simply go away, what are we going to do with the workforce? He's introduced legislation that would establish a pilot program that would give $500 per month to 1,000 families. Most basic income proposals are local, but there's talk of taking this national. Investment management firm Bridgewater Associates estimates the cost at $3.8 trillion per year to give people a basic income of $12,000. The entire federal budget is just over $4 trillion. Finland launched a basic income program in 2017. 2,000 unemployed people received a monthly stipend, no strings attached. The government pulled the plug. According to the Daily Signal's Jarrett Stepman, taxpayers simply became fed up with paying people not to work. To implement the program nationally would have necessitated a 30% tax increase. Jarrett Stepman writes that with UBI, we'd risk creating a kind of warehouse society, whereby one class of people works while the other skates by mostly on public money, seeing no incentive to work or better their condition and status. UBI is the left's dream. The Wall Street Journal's Andy Kessler calls it a gateway drug to collectivism. JFK worried about machines stealing jobs in the 60s, telling reporters automation, of course, is replacing men. That fear ignores the genius of our capitalist system. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
A couple of days before a momentous election that's taking place. These are momentous midterm elections, and it seems like there's better turnout than a normal midterm. There's a lot of excitement taking place. We did have a caller. She had to go. But I'm going to let both of you two weigh in on her question. It's one that I actually can't answer. She wanted to know, if you send in an absentee ballot, how do you know they even got it and that it was counted? Buddy, what do you think?
I don't think you do know if they have gotten it and it's been counted. And I think there have been cases in many cases on the absentee, they don't actually count those until after the election in some cases. So they'll say we've got these votes and we've got the absentee or the military that have been mailed in or so forth. And if it's in a real close election and somebody's challenging it, those mail-in ballots could make a difference.
Yeah, so then you have to wait for those to be counted.
Right.
But Jeremy, do you have any thoughts on whether, I mean, it would be nice, I guess, if you could hear back that your absentee ballot was counted, but that doesn't happen.
This is a great question for law school exams in the future, or for philosophers to sit around and philosophize about into the future. There is actually a principle in the law called the mailbox rule, which counts for once that letter has been put inside the mailbox, it is counted as having been filed. All right, so that usually goes around figuring out if you filed on time, if you met the deadlines in time, or if you filed a lawsuit back when you used to have to do that by mail or in person.
Or you file your taxes.
Or you file your taxes, actually. That's true as well. Was it in the mailbox before the deadline and all that kind of stuff? So I would say this is akin to that mailbox rule, and every attorney that's listening to me right now kind of shudders thinking about the mailbox rule because none of us know what it actually means or when it actually means. Thankfully, we don't have mailboxes so much to deal with anymore these days. But I think once it is put in the mailbox, it is considered filed. Whether it is actually counted later on, I mean, even if you went that day, you'd have to actually follow it like Mr. Rogers style through the entire factory process to figure out if when someone actually says, boom, that one was counted, you can't truly know. And that's where the philosophers are going to have to come in and get all Kantian on you or something like that. But it's okay to assume that once you have put it in the box, once you have pressed the button and the little light blinks, voted or whatever, or if you've done it and filled in the little bubble and put it through the scan machine, it's considered counted at that point.
We've got to have faith, I guess, that it actually worked. It's based on faith. Ladies and gentlemen, we are taking your calls, 800-351-1212. The caravan coming forth. And as we mentioned before the break, the president has, I mean, he doesn't want the American people to think that he's just going to allow thousands of people to come in illegally when those caravans arrive at the border. So he's thrown out, number one, he's sent troops to the border to help. Number two, he's talked about actually.
And we don't know the actual number yet because they said 5,000, 5,200. They have, I think, implied there might be more, but they haven't come up with a final.
I heard the number 15,000 yesterday.
Yeah, but I think Mattis denied that it was going to be that many, but sounds like it's going to be a bunch.
Yeah, so they'll be there. What they'll be doing, we don't know. But in a sense, I mean, it's sort of reassuring to know that at least we'll have people there facing the situation. He's also talked about building structure, some sort of quote-unquote tents for people to stay in because there's a time period quite lengthy sometimes for asylum seekers before they get their hearings. And there's all this sort of news about family separations, children being separated from parents. If you had places, tents, you could put everybody together and wait out the legal system rather than catch and release, what you keep hearing about. And then the other idea he's floated is, because this is something he's been for a long time, getting rid of this whole idea of birthright citizenship. I posted two pieces from two attorneys. One is George Conway, and he's also co-written this with someone else. But George Conway is the husband of Kellyanne Conway, President Trump's aide in the White House. And another is from Hans von Spassky from Heritage Foundation. One says it's unconstitutional to repeal birthright citizenship rights. But Hans from Heritage says, no, it's highly appropriate to repeal that. So, Jeremy, give us, first talk a little bit about the origins of birthright citizenship.
Yeah, well, it's based in the 14th Amendment, and I'm by no means a scholar on birthright citizenship, but I think Hans von Spassky's piece, which you can find at the Daily Signal, was published yesterday, dailysignal.com, if I remember correctly. Anyway,
and we posted it at Point of View.
Oh, great! Too. Even better, pointofview.net is easier to get that there. But Hans makes a very good case for what is being talked about here. And again, I'm going to go back to what I said before the break. There exists no memo that we're aware of. There is only the president saying, "I'm going to consider creating one." And the whole world went nuts at that very mention of the fact that he would dare to put down in writing something he's talking about here. But what Hans talks about is that the 14th Amendment puts out there the language, I'm trying to find that very quickly here, that you can be subject to all, it says all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens. And the point that he's making is that if you somehow manage to find that magic line in the sand between Canada and the United States, or Mexico and the United States, or offshore versus onshore, if you're on a boat and you happen to wander into American waters at the time, 1 minute you were off property of the United States, and the next minute you're on the sovereign soil, and you happen to give birth on that line or above on our side of the line, does that automatically make that child an American citizen? And Hans's answer is no. And his answer is no because of the last part of that phrase, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. He points to ministers from other countries, ambassadors that may come here. They are on American soil technically, and let's say that they're outside of their embassy, have birth in the hospitals of these United States. Technically, that child is born on American soil. Does that automatically make that child a citizen? No. Why? Well, because they are not subject to the jurisdiction thereof, and that subject to the jurisdiction thereof means that they have made their political allegiance known, that they are no longer a political ally of the country from which they left, and now are seeking the political direction of the country that they are now in. They are just simply on the soil. So there has to be that sort of intentional change from one to the other to take place before that 14th Amendment birthright citizenship so-called applies. Now, you need to understand that there is a movement out there to make the former interpretation, meaning that if you are on American soil, have birth of a child, that child is an American citizen and therefore is an anchor to the rest of the people that are here to bring you on. There's an intentional move in that direction by the legal community to make that happen, but it may not actually be what is actually meant by the 14th Amendment. That's where the debate is right now. And I think if the Supreme Court, if the president actually does put down in writing something on this point that he talked about, that's what will ultimately be the argument going from here to the Supreme Court.
So the question is, can the president, and we'll talk a little bit more about this after the break. We're going to have a long break in a few minutes, but we'd love to hear from you in the next hour about it too. What do you think? Because is this something that the president should be able to do by executive order? Should the Congress, if in fact it's constitutional to repeal birthright citizenship, should the Congress be the ones to do it? Or is it okay? Does the president have it within his power to do this? And I think he's taking the opportunity right now because of the caravans. It's just given him the impetus to be able to talk about another sort of plank in his immigration platform, if you will. And so he's doing that at this point, and certainly stirs up the emotions of voters and his base. So that's probably another reason he's doing it. But it's an interesting conversation, and I think one we need to have. And certainly, it's birthright citizenship is a carrot for illegal immigration. And if we think illegal immigration is a problem, then this would be one way to help solve it, along with others like a wall. In fact, I did hear Senator Ted Cruz say, let's not focus there. Let's focus on the wall. And let's not even focus on that because it becomes such a political hot button. So that could be another way of coming at it. So anyway, it's something we'd love to talk about. And also, do you have any concerns about the caravans that are heading north? We'd love to hear about that. Stay with us. We'll be back.
From Graceworks Pictures comes Indivisible, based on the true story of Army Chaplain Darren Turner and his wife Heather.
It is with great honor that I have served my country. But I only stand before you today because Jesus is my rock, and because I have a family who loves and believes in me.
One marriage, one family, under God. Indivisible. Rated PG-13. May be inappropriate for children under 13. Now playing. More information is available at indivisiblemovie.com.
A major problem with socialism is that it allows people to benefit from the hard work of others. It permits the idle and indifferent to live off the efforts of their neighbors. For a society to prosper, everyone who is able has to contribute. And that's the only way Point of View Radio can bring you truth. We are profoundly thankful for you who have joined the Truth Team and make this program possible. If you're not on board, join today. Invest in our future together. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen, for Point of View. It's our weekend edition. In studio with me, Jeremy Dyes from First Liberty Institute, and also Dr. Merrill Matthews from the Institute for Policy Innovation. And we're looking at the caravans coming north. And, you know, a lot of talk this week about this being a tactic of the left. It's out of their playbook, really. We've asked the question, who's funding the caravans? Who's behind this? The caravans they've increased in number and decreased in size to some degree. Mm-hmm. So what is that about? A lot of the folks are coming from Honduras, where people definitely do have complaints about their life there, and they're going to come to the U.S. and ask for asylum here. And Dr. Matthews, you have written about this. In fact, you wrote for the Texas Tribune, I guess it is.
No, it's the Tribune Media Services.
Tribune, okay.
So it's a nationally syndicated piece.
Okay, great. We've posted the piece. Pro-Caravan is a concerted effort by Honduran leftists to bypass U.S. immigration laws. So I think this is one of the reasons why the president sees this as an important thing to deal with when these people actually get to the U.S.
Yeah, right. People have been coming to the U.S. illegally for as long as we've been around. But this seemed like something more organized and better funded than what we typically see. And as the Wall Street Journal pointed out a week or so ago, one of the leftist politicians in Honduras claimed credit for doing this. I mean, it is something that he organized and got started. There are groups out there that are funding, that are sending money to this and other aid and help in order to help both to get it started and to help the immigrants as they're moving north. But they came to the Honduran border. When they came to the Mexican border, the Mexican officials were trying to stop them from across. They sort of burst through that thing. I'm told that they put women and children up front, and they kind of pushed through, and the Mexican officials moved back because they didn't want to in any way hurt women and children who were trying to come across, and they are making their way up. Mexican officials have offered them, the president of Mexico has offered them an opportunity to be able to get asylum in Mexico and get a job. I think the reports are saying about 1,000 have taken that up, but the caravan still seems to look like 3,000, maybe 4,000, and then other caravans are beginning to start in the further south. So this looks like it could be multiple waves coming up, and the president wants to try to address that, because you simply can't have it when it's individuals and small groups coming across. That's a problem. When it's a wave that comes in and just moves in, that's a problem.
I think to analogize on that point, believe what you want about immigration and all of that, and you're entitled to your opinion on it all. The law is what the law is, and we'll have those discussions as well. But think about going to the DMV as it is right now, and it's a process. Mm-hmm. Now think about going to the DMV to renew your driver's license, and 3,000 people are there. Pretty hard, right? I mean, it would be overrun. It'd be very difficult.
Exactly.
You'd be there for days, weeks, years. You're already there in limbo for an eternity to get your driver's license renewed. Think about now having to wait in a line daily for 3 years to get that. It's an overwhelming assault on the resources of these United States just to process any of that. Whether or not they send them back or whether or not they admit them, it's a very difficult process for that to go at all quickly. And so there's a right reason for us to be concerned about that, beyond the merits of whether or not we ought to be welcoming people into these United States that come in that direction. I think there is a greater policy discussion to be had as to whether or not this is an asylum, coming in legitimately seeking asylum. Look, we welcome 1 million plus people a year in through the United States through immigration by a variety of means, both by green card. I think it's 1 million and 1,000,008 or something, 1,000,012 or something like that for general asylum seekers. We can weigh all of that perfectly fine, but you can't do it in chunks of 5 and 10 and 14,000 at a time without expecting lots of problems to occur.
So one of to your point, one of the problems I point out in the piece is we do accept roughly a million people with green cards every year, have been more or less 1 million for the last 30 years. I mean, we accept a lot of people here legally, but the process is already being overwhelmed right now. The illegal immigration, their arrest at the border was significantly higher 20 years ago, but it dropped and it's moving back up now. The wait time for those who are trying to go through the process once they come across and they ask for asylum is over 2 years now. They're in the catch and release. They're allowed to go to wherever they want to typically, and then because
so we lose them often.
We lose them. That's right. Catch, release, and lose.
Yeah.
But what's happened there is roughly last year, 37% did not show up for their trial, for the hearing when it came up. The year before, it was 43%. So at that point, you're nearly half who don't even show up for the hearing before the judge. So they know that our system is overwhelmed and somewhat dysfunctional as it is right now. You come up in that mass and you just crowd the system. And I think they're hoping to get released and maybe hoping that Democrats take over the House, maybe the presidency in 2020, and maybe if they're can get in, then you have the chance of some type of citizenship offer coming if the White House changes in 2020.
Do you think that as an issue right now before the election, who does this help?
I think initially it helped the Republicans. I think that's why Democrats typically didn't want to talk about it. When you bring the birthright citizenship in, how does that muddy the water? I just don't know. But I think that you were seeing more and more Republicans. In fact, I cited in the piece a Rasmussen poll showing that 51%, I believe, felt that President Trump should stop them at the border. Roughly 34% or so said that they disagreed. So it was a pretty hefty majority from that saying you need to stop them.
So this president has now said that next week he's going to issue some kind of a strong executive order. I don't know exactly what it will have in it. It may have something about troops. It may have something about tents at the border. And it may have something about birthright citizenship. It may have all of that. He may issue several orders. But that's what we can expect next week. And I think that he's trying to do the thing, number one, that he thinks is right. There's no question we've known that he doesn't like birthright citizenship. So he's using this opportunity. But I also think he thinks it will help Republicans in the election. What do you think, Jeremy?
Well, I think anything a politician does is calculated to have a political effect. So I think that's probably very much the case. Oddly enough, we're not talking about things that we were talking about and consuming ourselves with a month ago. Actually, some things that would help Republicans as well. There's no more talk about Justice Kavanaugh being accused of whatever it was. That seemed to just somehow disappear.
Justice who?
Yeah, exactly.
What about all the good economic numbers that we discussed earlier in the program?
And the ones that just came out today, right? I mean, hundreds of thousands of new jobs, millions of jobs that have come out now. There's all kinds of things that could be being talked about. And yet I think the running main story on Drudge Report right now is about Oprah Winfrey stumping for the gubernatorial candidate in Georgia, which makes me wonder, when did she move to Georgia? I didn't know that she had moved down there or not.
I think she lives in Santa Barbara. Ladies and gentlemen, we're taking your calls, 800-351-1212. What about the caravan? What about birthright citizenship? We'll be back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Most people would expect liberals to be open-minded, and yet they find that they are often the most intolerant. Kim Holmes explores the reason for this transformation in his new book, The Closing of the Liberal Mind. He was on my radio program to talk about the history of the radical change in mindset and attitude. Now, classical American liberalism in this country was based on a belief in liberty. Citizens were to be free from government coercion and thus free to believe something different from the orthodoxy forced on it by the state. They were also free to discuss and debate, and most importantly was a belief in true tolerance, which accepted the right and freedom of others to believe differently from you. It was a live and let live philosophy. I may disagree with your views, but I would defend your right to believe them. That is not the view of the postmodern left today. They practice the politics of intolerance. They may think that they are tolerant, but really live in a world where bigotry and discrimination are allowed against any view that is not politically correct. They are willing to stifle free thought, censor free speech, and use public shaming in order to suppress any idea they do not like. Now, in his book, he talks about the campus bullies, but we also discussed how this has moved into even the business world. Now we have corporate bullies willing to use economic power to stifle and suppress legislation they abhor. He says we have a new ruling class that is wealthy, smart, well-connected, and formidable. Although their numbers are small, actually in the thousands, their influence in the media, in the academy, and in government is significant. They also believe that they have a higher truth which is superior to the common wisdom of the day. You know, we're in a battle with a new kind of liberal mind, and that is why we need to read about the closing of the liberal mind. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Graceworks Pictures, Indivisible, based on the true story of Army Chaplain Darren Turner and his wife Heather. Rated PG-13. Now playing. IndivisibleMovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter, along with Jeremy Dyes and Buddy Matthews, talking caravans and elections and taking your calls at 800-351-1212. We'd like to know your opinion on birthright citizenship. Is Trump right in wanting to do away with it? Should he do it by executive order? Do we need to get the Congress involved here? Apparently, Lindsey Graham, senator from South Carolina, is going to introduce legislation to end birthright citizenship. So he's taking that step. And then also the election. Any thoughts? Do you have any predictions? Is this blue wave that's been predicted going to materialize or not? And, of course, we're going to ask Jeremy and Buddy to weigh in on that, too. But let's take a call. Julie is in the state of Georgia. There, a Senate race going on there. Very tight Senate race. Hi, Julie. Thanks for calling in.
Hey, thanks for taking my call. I'm actually calling from Savannah, Georgia. It's a really heated thing going on here. You can just imagine all the comments and all the things posted on social media back and forth. If you're for, Kemp or Stacey Abrams. We have
Kemp was actually, Trump went to Georgia and spoke for him, right?
Vice President Mike Pence did yesterday.
Okay.
And did
Trump,
Oprah.
I believe. Oprah did for Stacey Abrams. And I know people are saying, well, what is she doing here? She's not from Georgia. And I totally agree. But in all fairness, Pence isn't from Georgia either, or Trump. So they're
Are you there? Looks like we may have lost Julie. Julie, are you back? Okay, we're gonna hold that line and try to get her back because we want to hear that. It's very interesting. Okay, Steve says try it again. Hi, Julie, are you back?
Yes.
We lost you. Okay, I think it's okay if I would not critique the fact that anyone would go and speak for someone else.
Right.
That's just Oprah is respected by certain people, so she's out there campaigning for her favorite candidate.
Right. She's not from Georgia, but neither is, Vice President Pence or Trump, which, just to be fair, but we are praying for a red tsunami here. We really do not want Stacey Abrams. Everything that she stands for is not good for Georgia. It is not good for our country. And there's a whole laundry list. And there's so much debate going on in Savannah. There's so much anger and tension because, everybody is a close-knit community here, so it's dividing a lot of people. But it's we're going to be in a heck of a fix if Stacey Abrams gets any power for our state. We really will be.
Julie, do you see a lot of your friends who might normally be voting for Republicans sort of having second thoughts about it because they don't like Donald Trump, don't like his tweets or something of that nature? Are you seeing some bleed off over to the Democrats because of that?
No, actually, I'm seeing it the other way. I'm seeing people who understand what Abrams is about, that most of her financial support we do know is coming from California. I have relatives that live in San Diego that are lifelong Californian residents, and they're sending me messages constantly about what they're afraid of for Georgia. So that should tell you something right there.
So what is I know she's very much on the left. What is your biggest worry about her?
Well, that just says everything right there. But the biggest worry is that Atlanta has, she's here appealing to the black voters, okay? In Atlanta, now in Savannah, she's speaking to the International Longshoremen's Association, which is, a big union thing, employs, I would say mostly black males. She's trying to get the black vote away from Kemp. And that's fine, but she doesn't have anything to offer those people. We're afraid of what her ideas are. She wants to give away free health care to employees who are just employed, even if they've only been on the job for like a week. She wants it to extend to their friends and family. That doesn't even make any sense. She wants the Hope Scholarship. She wants all this education money given to illegal aliens, illegal immigrants. That's what she wants. We're afraid she's going to turn Georgia into a sanctuary state. She wants to do that with Atlanta, a sanctuary city. She does. She has said that.
Okay.
And it's not out of fear. I mean, we just, we don't want this. We don't want her. We don't want what she stands for. We don't want her ruining our state. We really don't.
Julie, thanks for calling in and weighing in on it because we have a lot of listeners in Georgia.
And
I know you do.
One of the things, given the sanctuary state notion, and I have not checked these for a few years, but Houston used to be one of the driving forces for human trafficking, one of the primary target points. Atlanta was another one. And if you make Atlanta a sanctuary state, you may have a lot of human traffickers who are there who get some type of sanction because of the state.
Something like that posted on social media about the human trafficking and how that all kind of ties in. But, you start with one item in their whole platform. It's just like a trickle-down method. And these are big items. They're not something to be overlooked. If we continue to overlook what they're trying to do to this country, we're going to lose it, And I don't think that's being pessimistic. It's just time that we stand firm, stand strong, and keep standing, All
right. Thank you, Julie. We appreciate your call.
Thanks for all you do. I try to get people to listen to you. I support you, too. So
we
thanks
appreciate it.
Yes.
And just when the Braves are getting good again. This is happening in Georgia.
Really.
Yeah, I've got a sweet niece that actually lives in Georgia, and she works for the Atlanta Braves. And so, yeah, I love Georgia. It's a beautiful state, and it's hard fought right now for one of those Senate seats that could tip the control of the United States Senate. Let's take another call. Nick is in South Carolina. Hi, Nick. Thanks for calling in.
Hey, fine. Thank you for taking my call, Penna. The reason that I'm calling is it struck me the other day that, Beck, you remember the Cuban boat lift that Castro sent all of
Merrill boat lift.
The Merrill boat lift where he sent the
Merrill.
Yeah, the mentally retarded and criminals. He cleaned out the jails and the insane asylums.
Yes.
And the violence that was sent to this country, and this group of people that are coming up kind of remind me of that because of what they're doing and how they're acting. They act like criminals.
I think you've got a mixed bag of people in these caravans.
Look, there's a real solution to this entire caravan situation, and that is very simply to put a line of buses right on the edge of the border and have them beeline for Beverly Hills, San Francisco, and any other liberal city that is crying about whether or not we should be allowing these folks in. We have sanctuary cities in San Francisco. Why don't we just put them there and make sure that the left takes well care of them? I mean, if that's such a great solution, let's just play into that.
What do you think?
What's going to keep them there? They'll go there and then they'll come up to the rest of the country, and that's been the problem now with the violence that you have from the illegals.
Yeah, of course, Nick. I'm joking about the whole thing, but the situation is just very odd that we have this great sympathy from the left, but they're not willing to have them in their own backyard at the same time. So that it demonstrates the hypocrisy that we see out there.
And, Nick, from my standpoint, I suspect because the left wants to say that many of these people are suffering persecution, they're looking for good jobs, there may be abuse and other things in a difficult country, and I don't disagree with some of that. I think a lot of that's true for many, if not most of them. But I think we would be naive to think that freeloaders, criminal elements, and human traffickers, and even perhaps terrorists wouldn't see this as an opportunity to sort of slip in here and move in with the crowd because it's going to overwhelm our system if we try to move them through the process. So the left has come up habitually when somebody says, I think that's the case, they said, show us evidence. Well, you'd be foolish not to think that there aren't some bad people in that large of a group trying to blend in and come across.
Absolutely.
Well, if you notice, most of them are young men.
Yes, that's
and it's interesting. Rush was talking earlier today about Merkel and how she invited all them Syrians in, and all she brought in was a bunch of terrorists and thugs, thinking she was going to get laborers and some help for her country.
Well, this actually hits on a particular point because there are a lot of young men in this group, and there are pictures, video of them throwing rocks and so forth. And Trump has said yesterday he's going to allow the military to respond if that happens.
A rock is a weapon. Ladies and gentlemen, stay with us. We've got more Point of View. We continue to take your calls, talking elections and talking caravans, and we'll be back.
Protect the health of the nation. Join the Point of View Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Or call 800-347-5151.
So there's this guy named Jordan. He's a healthy guy. He's a dad of 6, and he works as a guide in Alaska. And he goes to the doctor, true story, he goes to the doctor and he's diagnosed with cancer, stage 4. And here's the thing. He had switched earlier from medical insurance to Medishare, where Christians share each other's medical bills. So the question for Jordan and his wife Jenny was, is this actually going to work?
Our medical bills exceeded $160,000. Medishare members shared all our bills.
And it was about more than just the money, too. This is a real community.
Medishare is a family, a group of people that stick with you through the hardest times of your life. I just don't know how I could have done it without Medishare.
It's so worth looking into. There's a reason this is growing so fast. So if you want to find out more, here is a number for you. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
Also, Dr. Merrill Matthews from Institute for Policy Innovation and Jeremy Dyes, Senior Counsel at First Liberty Institute, here for your Friday weekend edition. My question for you is, have you voted? I am actually going to go after the show today and go directly to the polls and early vote because I don't want to count on nothing coming up on Tuesday that would stop me. Because we've got some very important elections here in Texas, as do many of you who are listening to Point of View. We've just heard from a caller in Georgia where there's a very tight Senate race between Brian Kemp and Stacey Abrams. A lot of issues on the table, and you've got that throughout the country. So I encourage you to vote. I know that folks that listen to Point of View are informed voters, so we encourage you to vote. We got something. This is a message from our Facebook email, and a Christian family from Honduras has answered questions about how they're doing down there because, you know, we hear that there's gang violence and problems that are causing people to think they need to leave the country, walk up through Mexico to the United States to either seek asylum in Mexico or here in the U.S. And so this was the response. First of all, they say the country is normal. People are working and studying. Life is the same. So, you know, this particular person says it's not all that bad there. But that's, you know, it's a country that different things are happening in different places. Mm-hmm. The Honduran government, says this person, has created a place for those who return. They have been pressured by the U.S. I know that we have talked to the leaders in Honduras, asking them to take care of their own instead of expecting us to give them asylum. They are given shelter, medicines, basic necessities until they can return to their normal lives. Some of the people in these caravans have admitted they were paid to do the crossing, and we've seen that, buddy. We've seen even video of that. Many also realized they were used to achieve a dream that does not exist. Some sold all their belongings, and now they have nothing, just to see how they use women and children by placing them as shields in front of a march is very obvious and very sad. So some people may be paid to be in the caravan, to be part of this. Other people really are truly seeking asylum, and somewhere in between. Probably terrorists, probably criminals, and probably just people who are in a bad way. So they're filled with all kinds of people, and we don't really know who they are, do we?
And just a clarification, Kemp is running for governor against Stacey.
Oh, yeah. Sorry about that. Ladies and gentlemen, we are taking your calls, 800-351-1212. And really, that's where we have it. We've got governor races, gubernatorial races, and Senate races that are very tight across the nation. And so I do want to encourage you to vote. Let's take a call. This one is from, I think the name is Miss, in the state of Georgia. We have a lot of listeners there, as we said. Miss, thanks for calling in.
Hello?
Yes. What's your comment?
Yeah, my comment is, you asked, do we think there's going to be a red wave or a blue wave?
Yes.
I'm rooting for the blue wave.
You think there'll be a blue wave?
Blue wave, and Stacey Abrams. Yoo-hoo!
Yoo-hoo. All right. Well, we had. I'm getting an echo, but we had something. We had a caller who was for her opponent, for Kemp, and so what are your reasons?
My reasons for Stacey?
Yes.
Oh, Brian Kemp. Have you heard? I mean, he's releasing rapists or child molesters or whatever that is. He's suppressing votes. I mean, pointing a gun at a teenager in his commercial. I mean, nothing that he's promoting or is going on record stating is right. I mean, I'm totally against that.
Okay. So do you have like reasons, or do you have backup for those statements that you just made?
I just gave them to you. It's public information.
And those are actually allegations. When you talk about voter suppression, I believe that what they've been trying to do is clean up their rolls. In Georgia, they maybe have taken that later than you would normally expect. But, of course, the attempt to try to clean up the rolls is a standard practice out there. And any time a state does that, They're accused of voter suppression. I don't want to necessarily say that every time that's done, all the motives are pure and honest, but they do have to engage in that type of attempt to try to clean up the rolls.
You know, I might mention on that particular race, let me just, I'll let you talk, but I do know one thing about that particular race, and that is Kemp, the Republican, is the Secretary of State currently. Right. And so he's been, that's his job, to work on the voter rolls. And so that has been taken then into the campaign, as sort of the timing, as Buddy just mentioned. But his work as Secretary of State has been taken then in to attack him with in the race. So it's, that's there.
Not true.
I'll let you respond,
though. It's factual and public information that he has suppressed 53,000 votes in Atlanta, in Georgia. So it's not his role to do that. And
how's he suppressed it, though?
That's making it worse because he is Secretary of State. As Jimmy Carter asked, I mean, he should just resign. How is he going to be in the race and then be over the watchdog of the race? That doesn't make any sense.
I think if he's not doing anything illegal, it's probably permissible, and I'm not sure what all the other states do with regard to that, whether you're required to resign.
If it was permissible, there wouldn't be a lawsuit currently against what he's doing. So it's not permissible.
Well, there might be.
Again, to the point, he is Secretary of State. So, I mean...
Okay. Thank you, Miss, for calling in. I'm just going to say that we've got people on both sides of that particular race calling in, so thank you.
Yes, the Secretary of State oversees that. I don't think they're typically not required to resign from their current position if they're running. Sometimes they can't. Some states prohibit you from running for two positions at the same time. Lyndon Johnson in Texas several years ago wanted to make sure he could run for Senate and President at the same time. So
I'm not sure. I think that Brian Kemp is ending his tenure as Secretary of State.
Well, yeah, he's not running for Secretary, so he wouldn't be there afterwards.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you so much. I do not want to discourage people from weighing in, but it's sometimes hard to have a conversation when.
But it has happened as various states have tried to clean up their rolls, because you do have people who've moved, people who've changed counties, moved out of the state, sometimes are no longer eligible to vote, or other things of that nature. As they try to clean these up, they always get accused of voter suppression. As I said, I'm not going to assert that all these motives are innocent, but you do have to do that. But you oftentimes get accused, and a legal process starts, which ends up delaying the process. So they're hoping that they can get any kind of clean up the rolls done after the election. If it moves before the election, then you're really accused of voter suppression.
Yeah, and one more part of that, and that is that if your ballot is questioned when you take it to the when you go to the polls, you can still vote. And I think that's a fallacy that's out there. It's just that it's a provisional ballot.
That's right. And they'll sometimes give them 10 days or so to allow that to be counted.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, 800-351-1212. Let's go to Rick in South Carolina. Hi, Rick. Thanks for calling.
On that last caller, the ad that she was talking about where Kemp is holding a gun on somebody, it was all meant in jest. It was an ad where he was talking with a teenage boy who was wanting to date his daughter. Now, what's happening is some of these people, they're taking these talking points that people like Oprah are coming out with, or Stacey Abrams, and they're running with it ignorantly.
That's why I kept trying to ask where the information came from, but you can't.
Exactly.
They have their talking points, and that's it.
Exactly. Anyway, that's all
right.
I had.
Well, thank you. That was helpful.
Though it does strike me, even if it's done in jest, sometimes things are probably not well timed, or maybe should have, or ill-conceived ideas that sometimes are done in jest.
Yeah, we have to think about our campaign ads.
As Hillary Clinton did here just the other day when she was asked about Eric Holder, and she made a comment that referred to black people, and she was dramatically criticized for that. Probably so. I think she was being, sort of using a comment that's done in jest, but it just did not go well.
Yeah, it's hard to be. I don't want to be or relish the role of having to watch every word, but you really do.
You have to watch every word these days.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're so grateful you're with us, and we do have another segment. We're taking your calls, 800-351-1212. And really, we're talking about the elections, the importance of this midterm election. As we mentioned earlier in the program, it's normal for the party, the president's party, to lose seats. And we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. It's looking like the United States Senate may stay with the GOP, may even gain a seat or two. But again, we don't know. All we can do is encourage participation in this election, and that's what we're asking, that you get out there and vote if you haven't done so. Do it early or do it on Election Day, and take your family and friends with you, your like-minded people that you have educated, and that will be a good thing to accomplish this week. We'll be back.
A really bad idea is bubbling up from the left. It stems partly from the idea that artificial intelligence and the resulting automation of jobs from driving to technology will displace so many workers we've just got to do something. The universal basic income has been floated by Barack Obama and certain Silicon Valley titans, among them Bill Gates, Richard Branson, and Mark Zuckerberg. They see UBI as an efficient way to prevent poverty in our hyper-automated and globalized future. Facebook co-founder Chris Hughes is helping fund a pilot UBI project in Stockton, California that launches next month. Chicago Alderman Amaya Pavar asks, if jobs simply go away, what are we going to do with the workforce? He's introduced legislation that would establish a pilot program that would give $500 per month to 1,000 families. Most basic income proposals are local, but there's talk of taking this national. Investment management firm Bridgewater Associates estimates the cost at $3.8 trillion per year to give people a basic income of $12,000. The entire federal budget is just over $4 trillion. Finland launched a basic income program in 2017. 2,000 unemployed people received a monthly stipend, no strings attached. The government pulled the plug. According to the Daily Signal's Jarrett Stepman, taxpayers simply became fed up with paying people not to work. To implement the program nationally would have necessitated a 30% tax increase. Jarrett Stepman writes that with UBI, we'd risk creating a kind of warehouse society, whereby one class of people works while the other skates by mostly on public money, seeing no incentive to work or better their condition and status. UBI is the left's dream. The Wall Street Journal's Andy Kessler calls it a gateway drug to collectivism. JFK worried about machines stealing jobs in the 60s, telling reporters automation, of course, is replacing men. That fear ignores the genius of our capitalist system.
For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
We've stirred up a bit of a hornet's nest from our Georgia callers, and we will take some. The number is 800-351-1212. Speaking of the election, though, there's a big issue that is important in this election, and it doesn't get as much publicity in the media, but it's one that's important to Americans. You know, Obamacare has actually become more popular, and but there are a lot of efforts by this administration and by certain people out there to get rid of parts of it, some of the worst parts of it, which some people say, well, really, we should get rid of the whole thing if we've gotten rid of the individual mandate.
Mm-hmm.
But many people are saying that they fear that Republican versions of a replacement would take away coverage for pre-existing conditions. And that's, that worries a lot of people. It seems like everybody expects now that your policy would cover pre-existing conditions and you wouldn't have to pay any more for it. But that, so that's very popular now. Buddy Matthews is an expert on healthcare, and he's actually written a paper that we posted here at pointofview.net. It's a complete analysis of what has happened with health insurance over the years, and I suggest you read it. I read it this morning, and I thought it was very informative. But, Buddy, what about, we have an enrollment season that's actually begun yesterday.
Started yesterday.
We're going to find out now because President Trump has put some extra types of insurance that you can get now that isn't the full Obamacare anymore. Limited temporary policies, for instance, or policies that don't encompass all the requirements of Obamacare. So we're going to see how that works out. But what about this whole idea of pre-existing conditions? It's been demagogued in a sense. And is it possible to affordably provide insurance to everyone without regard for pre-existing
I'd say more than
conditions?
just in a sense, because the pre-existing condition issue, while it did affect some people, was always a very small percentage of the population. Let me give you an example. Excuse me. If you are 65 and you're going on to Medicare, you will get accepted even if you have cancer. That's about 50 million Americans. If you're 70 to 75 million Americans who are qualified for Medicaid, you will get Medicaid coverage regardless of a pre-existing condition. 155 million Americans get their health insurance through their employer, their father, a worker, or their parents. If you're going to work for an employer who provides health insurance, that employer has to cover you. Now, they may put a 3-month exclusion on you before you were able to be covered by, but you will get it even if you have a pre-existing condition. So who were we talking about? We were talking about individuals who were uninsured and wanted to go out and buy a policy in the market after they had a major pre-existing condition. That was always around 1% or less of the population that it would even affect. And so as a result, those people who are in Obamacare, who are able to get that provision, roughly 10 million Americans, that's all we're talking about that's even affected. The market for people who had individual policies prior to Obamacare was roughly 16 or 17 million Americans. When you take the individuals who will go out and buy their policy now, you've got about 10 million in the Obamacare exchanges. You've got a 6 or 7 million who buy it on their own. It's the same number. So you could easily, Republicans and Democrats could have easily come up with a way to say, we're going to make sure there's a safety net. Every state had a safety net
like
prior to Obama.
high-risk pools.
High-risk pools were one. 35 states had those. Some worked well, some didn't. But you could have easily have fixed that problem so that everybody with a pre-existing condition who was uninsured could have an option. They didn't do that. Barack Obama wanted to completely restructure the whole system, which is what they did. But that particular provision, which hits a lot of people, they think, I don't want to find myself in that. It's going to affect almost no one, but a very small percentage.
Mm-hmm.
But people are afraid of it, so it has become a big issue, and Democrats are running on it.
And it's hard now to explain what you just explained. It's hard for the average person to explain this, or even the average candidate.
It's very difficult to explain it. Most people won't listen that long, and so Republicans are even embracing it because they don't feel like in a soundbite they can fight it.
So it's a campaign issue, and it will be out there certainly during the next 2 years before President Trump runs for re-election. Let's take another couple calls here before the end of the program. Let's go to Mark in Georgia. Hey, Mark, thanks for calling.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to respond to the lady that called in about the gubernatorial race there in Georgia with Kemp and Abrams.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of what she said was just wrong. The guy never pointed a gun at anybody. It was a commercial in support of gun rights. I think it was a pump or a gun that had a breech on it, and he made it, make a sound by closing the breech. And then they took it and went with it and said that he was pointing a gun at a guy. The voting rights thing is wrong. We got so many people that aren't supposed to be voting, so they're just cleaning up those records like you explained. And it's just a matter of socialists in Atlanta trying to take over the state of Georgia. And, to a lot of people, Atlanta isn't Georgia anymore. It controls a lot of stuff that goes on in the state, obviously, but they don't represent most of Georgia. And it's real discouraging. I think it's like I told Rick, I've never even called a radio show, but when I heard her, I just said, I got to call and just say, a lot of what she was
Thank
saying
you for
is just
calling.
wrong. Thank you.
It's not just socialists in Georgia. Some of these races, governor and Senate races around the country, are getting money and support from outside the states.
Yes, they are.
And there's a real move to do that. We said it earlier in the program, buddy, before Jeremy, you came, but weigh in. When somebody votes falsely or they're not eligible to vote, they take away my vote. In other words, they invalidate my vote if they're voting for the opposite candidate from me. And so it's very important to keep our voter rolls clean. But yet, when states do that, they're attacked as suppressing the vote, aren't they?
It's a difficult place to be in because they've got that responsibility, and they usually have calendars that they have to follow in order to do that. And sometimes that puts them right up against the midterms or the presidential elections. It doesn't, perception-wise, look good, and perception is reality for most people. So it's a difficult thing to be in. But you're exactly right. It's an important element to be taken care of because it is the way in which we most closely govern our country. And if we are not able to cast with assurance that our vote is being equally weighed against people who are entitled to be able to have that vote, then it certainly dilutes our impact to be able to faithfully govern this country, which is our responsibility, not only before our fellow citizens, but before the God who has given to us the gift of government itself.
We've got more calls, people who want to clarify what's going on in Georgia that in response to the caller that we had earlier, Miss. But I can't take them because we're heading up onto the end of the program. But Jeremy,
if we wanted to talk about how the Braves are going to do better next year, having rebuilt their club from near the bottom of the list to the top of the list, I think that would be much more entertaining. And look forward to how they're going to actually take over the Dodgers next year and make sure that is a win. You may sense that I have a certain affinity for the Braves there. I grew up as a Braves fan my whole life, so I'm glad to see my team getting back up to the top of things. Wanted to end the program, of course, on something that we can all agree about, which is baseball season's over. It's only a few hundred days left until pitchers and catchers report again, and the Braves will be back to rule the National League again, where they should rightfully be, right? I mean, we all agree with this, correct? I'm sure all the callers in Georgia are singing the praises right now.
You heard it, ladies and gentlemen. You're either cheering Jeremy or not. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. And Andrew and also Steve and Karen, thank you so much for your work behind the scenes. Dr. Merrill Matthews, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we suggest that you go to pointofview.net. We've got Buddy's report on healthcare, which I highly suggest. Really, it was very interesting. I read it today. Take a look at that and all the articles that we have placed there for your reading pleasure. And really, we hope and pray that you have a wonderful weekend. And if you haven't voted, do it. We'll see you Monday.
From Graceworks Pictures comes Indivisible, based on the true story of Army Chaplain Darren Turner and his wife, Heather.
It is with great honor that I have served my country. But I only stand before you today because Jesus is my rock, and because I have a family who loves and believes in me.
One marriage, one family, under God. Indivisible. Rated PG-13. May be inappropriate for children under 13. Now playing. More information is available at indivisiblemovie.com.
A major problem with socialism is that it allows people to benefit from the hard work of others. It permits the idle and indifferent to live off the efforts of their neighbors. For a society to prosper, everyone who is able has to contribute. And that's the only way Point of View Radio can bring you truth. We are profoundly thankful for you who have joined the Truth Team and make this program possible. If you're not on board, join today. Invest in our future together. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.